Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. We are from Group 3 and we will be presenting on Chapter 7 about cross-cultural negotiation. Our team members consist of 4 people, which is Nurul Izzah binti Hazim, Nur Fatiha binti Zulkifli, Muhammad Syahmiru Fahmi bin Sufyan and Nur Fatiha binti Nur Azman. So, without further ado, let's begin with our lesson now. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurul Izzah binti Hazim and I'll be presenting on the first subtopic on this chapter, which is culture. In negotiation, culture can influence how individuals negotiate and how they view and interpret the negotiation process. So, let's take a further look at what culture is. Culture is a social group that share the same values and norms that distinguish them from other social groups. And it is usually bound by economic, politics, social and religion. Culture constructs a unique characteristic to this group such as language, social habits, food, music, art and architecture. The main reason we learn about culture in negotiation is to differentiate stereotypes from prototypes. It is because within culture lies a variety of key personal traits and different traits that makes a certain culture have a better performance but not others. Also, culture appears to be more different than it already is in comparison to a few years ago, especially with the rise of information technology. Next, we are moving on to another subtopic, which is culture as an iceberg. When it comes to culture, we should think of it like an iceberg. About one side of an iceberg is visible while the rest is submerged. So, we can take the visible part to represent the characteristic of a culture, such as behavior, institution and artifacts. Things such as customs, habits, traditions and other visible stimuli were derived from the visible parts. These artifacts and behavior help to convey a deeper value, beliefs and norms. Assumption can also transpire because of values and norms. Last but not least, artifacts and customs that distinguish a culture are not arbitrary, but rather an indication of fundamental values and beliefs about the world. So, when you understand the cultural aspect of negotiating, it can help you to become a stronger negotiator. That is all from me for these first 2 subchapters. Now we are moving on to another presenter. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nur Fatiha binti Zulkifli. Thank you Izzah for the great explanation about a culture. Next, I'm going to explain about value and negotiation norms. For this topic, there are 3 dimensions of culture that we are going to learn. First, individual versus collectivism. It is actually related to the fundamental human desire to preserve oneself over the group. Second, is egalitarianism versus hierarchy. It is actually related to how individuals affect one another, particularly side to side or hierarchically. Third, or lastly, is direct versus indirect communication. It is related to the manners individuals exchange information and messages. So, are you guys ready? Let's go! Hi everyone! The first dimension culture is individualism versus collectivism. For individualism, that is also called as competitor, the primary objective is to achieve your own benefit and maybe to make difference between your own self and the others. Usually, individualist people will consider themselves as free agent and autonomous player. Besides, they really value the seeking of pleasure and concern for their personal well-being. This is because individual culture demand on having influence and control over their surrounding. Not only that, the achievements are often praised by economic and the social system. Individualism implicates the use of distributive method. People who are more self-interested are more likely to engage in strategies that strengthen their negotiating power. For collectivism, the primary objective is to enhance the welfare of the groups or team. They usually perceive themselves as team members and prioritize each other. The spotlight is on social ties, and the need of adjustment is emphasized in collectivist society. These cultures are more concerned on have a harmonious relationship in interpersonal ties with the group. Moreover, interdependence between each other is promoted by the social norms that highlight on social responsibility and the give up of personal wants for benefits. Individualism and collectivism can be seen by the difference in some countries when negotiate. For example, United States, Germany, and Australia people score highly in individualism, while Pacific Rim countries such as China and Japan tend to be more collectivist. This thought process influences the way societies are organized and decisions are made. Next is implication for social negotiation for individualism and collectivism. Okay guys, before that, for this part, it might be long. I hope you all are still with me until the end. Okay, so first is social negotiation. People from various cultures vary in terms of work relationship density, closeness, and how the network is linked upward, sideways, or downwards. To put it as example, in one research, students from United States and Hong Kong negotiate with someone they thought was a friend or stranger from their own culture. When socializing with peers, Hong Kong students are more inclined to adjust their behavior rather than United States students. Second is cooperation. Those from collectivist cultural practice cooperate more than people from individualistic culture in mixed motive relationship. Collectivist societies place a larger focus on their community's wants and goals, and they are more ready to sacrifice their personal interests in order to achieve collective goals. For example, Americans are more likely to recall situations in which they influence others, whereas Japanese individuals are more likely to recall situations in which they adjust to others as a form of cooperation. Third is in-group favoritism. It is basically the strong tendency to favor members of their own group than the other groups, even when there is no valid reason to do so. Collectivist societies show more in-group favoritism than individualistic culture. Fourth is social loafing versus social striving. Social loafing is the tendency for people to work less hard and give less effort and resource while working in group environment rather than when working alone. For example, suppose you have a group an individual assignment. Doing assignment in a group is more simpler and less time consuming for you to identify the solution, right? But doing individual assignment will make you feel extremely lonely and you will have a lot of effort to complete the work. For social striving, it is a collectivist concern for the group's welfare that boosts people's motivation and performance. The United States is more towards individualism because they are focusing on serving the self-positive attribute and the need of outshine to be superior than others. Member in collectivist societies serve by concentrating on negative attributes in order to fit with the other people. Fifth is emotion and inner experience. Individualists and collectivists express emotional experience differently. So basically, Chinese are actually utilizing more physical and social work rather than European Americans. For example, both Chinese and European Americans speaking English during emotional situation. Therefore, Chinese Americans utilize more physical and social words rather than European Americans. Okay, number C is quite hard to pronounce, but I will try my best. So basically, dispositionalism versus situationalism. Dispositionalism is the inclination to ascribe the reason of a person's action to his or her character or underlying personality. Situationalism is the inclination to ascribe the reason of a person's action to factor and force beyond a person's control. Therefore, dispositionalism is more prevalent in individualistic culture. For instance, when a team member exhibits inappropriate behavior, United States participants are more likely to focus on the person qualities, whereas Hong Kong participants focus on situational factor. Number 7, or the last one, is preference for dispute resolution. There are 4 types of dispute resolution methods that describe how various cultures handle problems. So the first is bargaining, also known as negotiation. Basically, the two disputants keep complete control over the discussion process and the solution result. The second method is mediation, in which the disputant maintain the power over the ultimate judgment, but the process is guided by a third party. The third method is adversarial adjudication. It implies a court render binding settlement judgment, but the disputant maintain control of the process. Number 4 is there is inquisitorial adjudication. It means that the disputant hand over control of both the procedure and the final decision to a third party. Before we move to the next dimension culture, I hope you guys are still fresh and have energy to listen. If you want to take 5 or drink some water or even go to the toilet, please pause this video presentation. See you later. Hi, welcome back. So we will continue with the second dimension, egalitarianism versus hierarchy. Egalitarianism is a cultural orientation that everyone wants to be treated equally. This culture dynamic do not imply that everyone has the same status, but instead, the status difference are easily this day to overcome. People in egalitarian culture are empowered to handle conflict on their own. However, the power base in negotiation may change. In these societies, individuals' partners and information are important source of influence, while status and position are quite meaningless. For hierarchy, the status is revered in certain societies. Status indicate social power and is difficult to break into or modify. Subordinates are supposed to respect the superior, who are obligated to look after the needs of subordinate in exchange for their privilege. Besides, conflict actually affect the integrity of a hierarchical system, since it means that either the subordinate has failed to meet the expectation of superior, or superior has failed to meet the needs of subordinates. The norms in hierarchical culture is to not dispute the high status individuals. That's why if there is disagreement between people of the same social position, they are more likely to be resolved through respect to a higher authority rather than direct confrontation between social equals. For example, in China and Japan, superior interfere in disagreement. They act autocratically and reach more conservative conclusion. While in Western culture, superior usually settle down between themselves and achieve integrative outcome that go beyond contract-related requirement. So what is exactly sign of hierarchical culture? It is the title and honorific are often used. This is because people will know where they rank in comparative status. Next, leader and authority figure will give explicit direction, and subordinate have to wait to be given instruction. Family names are important as potential status. For sign of egalitarian culture, the title and honorific are not used except in formal situation, and first name are expected. Not only that, the equal rights and opportunity are codified under the law, and the people also tend to frown at boastfulness, and the teamwork is common in this culture. So, for the implication of negotiation for egalitarian and hierarchy, first is choose your representative. Power in egalitarian societies is largely defined by one partner, and it's not uncommon for people of different ranks to find themselves at the negotiating table. In contrast, power is correlated with someone's status and rank in hierarchical societies. Therefore, sending a lower-ranking subordinate to meet with the CEO is considered disrespectful. Second, understand the network of relationship. Negotiation in societies with hierarchical culture need numerous layers of approval, from the bottom line to the top level, while egalitarian is the vice versa. Third is space concern. In hierarchical culture, saving and delivering space are vital. According to a research of 4 cultures, China, Japan, Germany, and the United States, conserving another person's space is linked with being patient, apologetic, and giving in. But conserving own space is linked with positively defending. Western culture behave more overtly when their face is threatened, while Eastern culture act more gently. Fourth, the conduct of negotiation. In bargaining, a Western perspective emphasizes that each side is expected to express their own goals, and a back and forth exchange will take place. The Eastern perspective is considerably different. There are huge difference in how a negotiator responds and complementing the attitude of their counterparty in cross-cultural negotiation. Basically, American respond to cooperative but not hierarchically, which is distributive action, while Chinese negotiation respond to competitive but not egalitarian, which is integrative action. Finally, the third or last dimension culture is direct versus indirect communication. In culture with direct communication style, which tend to correlate with task-oriented culture, such as United States, Australia, Germany, and Anglo-Canadians, both literal truthfulness and efficiency in communication are highly valued and to some extent take priority over personal or political sensitivities, especially in a business setting. Saying no or I don't know is both honest and respectful to the other party because it does not mislead them or lead to a game playing. When this culture becomes open and has truthful conversation that is encouraged, problems are believed to be handled more quickly. While for indirect culture communication, for example like Japanese, Chinese, Indian, Saudi Arabians, immediately delivering negative information is considered disrespectful and rude, especially in a business situation. In this situation, polite reason or avoiding are made, whereby both sides typically acknowledge and accept as such. In extreme situation, outright fiction are invented again, with both parties acknowledging that a diplomatic technique is being used. When problems are addressed with sensitivity and common sense, they are perceived to be solved more effectively. Between these two styles, instant conflict can occur if the two parties are unaware of the other style and how it works. So the tips for direct people is to soften your statement and ease into topics gradually. Any kind of adverse news or opinion should be mitigated. Indirect people generally can hear between the lines very well, so they will understand you loud and clear. Next is to avoid outright demands for answer, such as why not, when can you have this, are you on board with this or not. You will be less as effective and far more diplomatic if you say, could you give us a little background on that? Can you tell us a bit about your thinking or position on that? The tips for indirect people is to realize that direct people are far more reassured to hear absolutely sincere answer that they want with a gentle letdown. It is a sign of trust and respect to express your true position without delay. If you cannot give immediate response, it is very helpful if you can give some kind of time frame in which you will answer. It will help them, and for sure direct people will understand indirect people more. Implication for negotiation for direct communication and indirect communication. The first one is information are necessary to reach integrative agreement. Getting the info on the table is crucial for expanding the pie because it is actually relying on context alone to convey information that required to create integrative agreement, which is insufficient. Negotiators from indirect culture, for example, will feel information that may not have been well transmitted through reciprocal offer by adding priority information and offers. Because indirect communication necessitates more complicated and delicate communication abilities, direct communication frequently find it difficult or impossible to engage in complexity. In direct culture, the process of making transaction come first, while in indirect culture, the connection come first and offer a framework for making deals. Second is dispute resolution preference. For example, managers in the United States are frequently satisfied with their result of interest-based negotiation. Example of interest-based negotiation are addressing the interests of the parties and synthesizing different topics. Other cultures like Hong Kong Chinese manager, however, adopt different dispute resolution strategies that sometimes give equally satisfied result. they were more likely to involve senior management in dispute resolution and to choose a third party with whom they had a relationship. I think that's all from me. I'm going to pass to the next subtopic to Shamirul Fahmi. I hope you enjoy my lesson. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Tia, for the wonderful explanation about the cultural values and negotiation norms. Hello everyone, I'm Shamirul Fahmi and I am going to elaborate more about the key challenges of intercultural negotiations. For your information, there are 8 key challenges of intercultural negotiation. First, we have expanding the pie. Second, dividing the pie. Third, sacred values and taboo trade-offs. Next, we have ethnocentrism. Fifth, we have bias punctuations of conflicts. Next, we have affiliation bias. And then, conciliation and caution. And the last one, we have naive realism. Let's explore one by one. First, let's see expanding the pie. A distributive negotiation often includes a particular topic, a fixed pie in which one party benefits at the expense of the other. Finding a solution that benefits both sides is the goal of integrative negotiation. The integrative negotiation strategy is associated with a problem-solving mentality that prioritizes trust, empathy, and mutual gain. The distributive negotiation method is linked to a competitive perspective, emphasizing power, control, and individual gain while depriving you of value. Negotiating across culture is more challenging than negotiating within a culture. A key research has been conducted in 5 countries, which are Japan, Hong Kong, Germany, Israel, and the United States. Compared intracultural negotiation, which means inside the cultural, with intercultural negotiations, which means across cultures. Negotiations between Japan and the United States resulted in smaller pie expansion than intracultural negotiation. Negotiators' bargaining method did not match in cross-cultural negotiation, showing that they had less knowledge of their counterparty's goals and did not produce as much value. Each culture expected the other culture to negotiate in its own way. For instance, North Americans expected others to speak directly, but those from indirect cultures expected others to communicate by implicit ways. When negotiating intra and interculturally, US negotiators communicate information directly and avoid using influence methods. When negotiating intraculturally, Japanese negotiators convey information indirectly and use influence, but when negotiating interculturally, they adjust their behavior. Next, let's move to dividing the pie. Positional, distributive, or competitive negotiation, fixed pie negotiation, and zero-sum game are some of the names for the form of negotiation in which there is only one winner and one loser. Both sides enter this form of negotiation as competitors, and they frequently maintain that position throughout. There are several manipulative approaches. The parties take rigid views and frequently fail to consider the actual needs and problems that underlie those positions. Those from the United States are more obviously self-interested than people from other cultures, and as a result, they frequently have larger expectations. Indeed, managers from China and Japan are less self-interested than American negotiators who have higher objectives than their adversaries, in part because of their collectivist traditions. Next, sacred values and taboo trade-offs. Sacred values, also known as protected values, are the beliefs, practices, and assumptions that underpin a group's or culture's belief system. Sacred values don't easily compromise with other values, especially those that are more practical. People are more likely to inflate the price, withhold information, feel moral outrage, and show cognitive uncertainty when they are thinking about purchasing or selling sacred objects. People may ignore unpleasant trade-offs when doing taboo trade-offs to serve their economic interests. Trade-off means interaction between parties in which one side gives up something less valuable in exchange for something more valuable, and vice versa. Sacred values are totally opposite to secular values, which are concerned and resources that may be traded. With a few significant exceptions, a near universal ascription to sacred values occurs within a society. Next, we have biased punctuation of conflict. Biased punctuation of conflict means people's tendency to see interactions with opponents as offensive and their own behavior as defensive. This happens when people view their rivals' interaction in self-serving and other derogatory ways. Negotiation behavior are a never-ending change of cause and effect relationships in which one person's action impact the action of others. To an outside observer, their context seems to be a continuous series of interaction. People who are actively involved in conflict, on the other hand, do not necessarily view things this way. Instead, they organize their interaction into discrete causal chunks, a concept called as causal chunking or punctuation. Causal chunks influence the extent to which people are aware of their influence on others, as well as their impressions of others. Affiliation bias is bias that happens when people judge someone's behavior based on their group relationship rather than merits of the action itself. For instance, when football supporters watch a game, they think the opposing team is guilty of more faults than their own team. Think about the following steps a country could take, which are testing a new assault weapon, building economic relations with a strong nation, or establishing a rocket base near the boundaries of a country which has strained relations. The perceived agent has a significant impact on how people regard certain activities to be acceptable. People's opinion of the acceptability of these activities vary greatly depending on the perceived agent. People view the identical objective action as sinister or benign based only on the agent's affiliation. Ethnocentrism refers to unjustified positive belief about one's own group in comparison to other groups. The universal strong liking of one's own group while simultaneously judging out groups negatively. The behavior may be similar, but the interpretation is not. People show preference inside groups even when their members do not know one another and never communicate. Conflict between groups and intergroup bias, however, are not necessarily caused by struggle for finite resources. The tendency to see individuals from various cultures as more similar than they actually are is an unfortunate byproduct of in-group preference. Cultural groups might experience symbolic conflicts as a result of difference in values and core beliefs. And then conciliation and caution. Conciliation is seen to be more effective with ourselves than with our adversaries. Caution is seen to be more effective against our adversaries than ourselves. A preference for punitive techniques with one's opponent may represent a desire to inflict hurt or pain, as well as a desire to influence conduct in a specific way. As an alternative, people could be more likely to use more coercive tactics with a counterparty because they believe that coming across as tough says something about their motivation and intentions, which could ultimately lead to the desired outcome. The last but not least, naive realism. Naive realism means the human tendency to assume that we view the world objectively and that others who disagree with us are either ignorant, illogical, or biased. This has two significant implications. First, this means that what we feel and how things are considered to correspond. Second, every sensible individual is supposed to share our viewpoints. If they don't, they are labeled as biased or mistaken. For example, if we support a political party and we believe their ideologies are the best, we may conclude that people who support a rival political parties and its their ideologies are incorrect or uninformed. The fundamental attribution error exists when people explain the origins of others' behavior in terms of their underlying disposition while ignoring the importance of situational factors. According to the fundamental attribution error, when asked to identify the source of the agreement, each group attributes the unfavorable elements of the conflict to the dispositions of the opponent. I think that's all from me about the key challenges of intercultural negotiations. Next, I'm going to pass to the next presenter, Nurul Izzah, to explain more about the predictors of success in intercultural interactions.
Thank you so much, Shamirul, for the great explanation on the key challenges of intercultural negotiation. Now, me, Nurul Izzah Zahidah, will be presenting about another subtopic, which is predictors of success in intercultural interactions. Intercultural communication skills are essential, especially when you are speaking or exchanging an information with various of people from different culture and races. This predictor helps negotiators to understand the other parties from different cultures. It is crucial for a negotiator to know because a ready-made personality is not a good indicator for international success. So, here are the characteristics that help to predict success. First is conceptual complexity, which means that people who are conceptually sophisticated and think in terms of grey rather than black and white have a lower social distance from others. Second is empathy. Third is broad categorization, which means that people who use broad categorize adapt better to a novel environment rather than those who use a narrower categorize. Next is critical acceptance of stereotypes, sociability, skill in collaborative conflict resolutions, willingness to communicate, for example, speak the host language without fear of making mistakes, sense of humor, passion, which means to suspend any judgment that we have to those who are different races and culture. Tolerance for differences among people, intercultural sensitivity, task orientation, openness to different point of view, cultural flexibility, which means the capability to exchange host culture activity for own culture value activities. Interest in the host culture, and last but not least is social orientation, which is the capability to develop new intercultural relationship. That is all from me for this subtopic. Now we are moving on to another presenter for the next subtopic. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamirul, for the great explanation about key challenges of intercultural negotiation. Next, I am Fatiha Azman, will explain on advice for cross-cultural negotiations. First of all, global negotiations are characterized by interpersonal behavioral differences that are reflections of deeper-seated cultural and institutional differences. In negotiations, negotiators should avoid arguing about the basic validity of a social system but instead focus on interpersonal understanding. Additionally, the quality of integrative negotiation depended more on the low-scoring than the high-scoring negotiator, showing that both parties to a conflict should have cultural intelligence. The type and quality of intra- and intercultural conversations are assessed using the quality of communication experience, which is QCE scale. Therefore, it shows that the higher the QCE, the better the negotiations outcomes. So, I will explaining on advice for cross-cultural negotiations. The first advice is anticipate differences in strategy and tactics that may cause misunderstandings. In multicultural negotiations, the negotiator who can identify differences in terms of interest, influence, and communication will be at an advantage in pie expanding and pie slicing. The negotiator who is aware of cultural variation will understand discomfort as a normal result of various cultural approaches, rather than assigning the counterparty's behavior in a negative way. It is a good thing you need to do when doing negotiations. For example, it is considered quite impolite in Chile country to eat anything with your hands, even though it is only French fries. You will always have a knife and fork in your hand. In opposite, eating with the fingers is a tradition in Malaysian culture. So, as I just mentioned, negotiators who are aware of this situation will see their discomfort as a normal of different cultural perspective, rather than negatively interpret their counterparty's actions. Next is a cultural perspective taking. Before entering into a negotiation, it is important for you to actively take the opposing party's culturally normal negotiating behavior into consideration. This is because understanding how a person's cultural background may affect how they react to a situation. So, how do you practice perspective taking? First of all, you need to imagine yourself having the same experience as another person, where you put yourself in their shoes. For example, in Chinese tradition, giving a shoes that pronounce xie, which is a Mandarin synonym for evil, is a bad luck. So, giving it to your Chinese friend as a present is impolite. Even if you will be happy in her situation, as you receive a gift, you may still relate with her experience by considering a moment when you receive a gift that you didn't like. So, you need to take this advice importantly to understand person's cultural background and make better negotiations. So we move on to the next advice, which is recognize that the other party may not share your views of what constitutes power. Negotiations that use power-based influence are more likely to encounter opposition and reach an impasse. In this part, you surely need to be prepared to share the information about your business and product and all the information while negotiating with people from the hierarchical cultures. Even if you feel that that is not important, that this should not be matter to the conclusion. For example, there is a situation where an American business person suffered a lot as a result of ignorance of cultural behavior. After long difficult negotiation, a US company secured a big contract from a Japanese company. However, at the signing ceremony, the Japanese executive began carefully reading the document. In the panic, the American offered to take $100 of each item. The US executive was unaware that the Japanese president was not resigning, but instead simply showing his power. So, as a negotiator, you must acknowledge that the other party may not share your understanding of what constitutes power. So, the next advice is avoid attribution errors. The tendency to attribute someone's actions or the occurrence of an event to the wrong cause is known as an attribution error. To avoid the fundamental attribution error, you should keep this bias in mind when judging others, and use techniques such as considering relevant past situations, coming up with multiple explanations for people's behavior, and explaining the rationale behind your judgment. Other than that, you also can use the general debiasing technique such as slowing down your reasoning process. For example, if you have ever condemned your employee as a lazy employee for arriving late to a meeting and continue in giving bad impressions to him because of his past mistake. Therefore, you need to realize that you have committed the basic attributions error as you are considering he as a lazy employee only because of one mistake. So, as a good negotiator, you need to avoid this attribution error in negotiations. So, we move on to the next advice for cross-cultural negotiation is know your options for change. In this part, people must develop both international and business competencies to succeed in international business. Differences in culture and thought could run counter to your own standards of behavior. This is because understanding culture is one thing, but deciding how much to adapt it is a whole other. Consider the 4 possibilities that people have when interacting with someone from a different culture, which is the first one is integration, assimilation, separation, and marginalization. Integration is a kind of cultural assimilation in which one group maintains interaction with the other culture while also preserving its own culture. While the other one, assimilation, happens when a group or individual loses connection with their own culture while maintaining interaction with another culture. While separation happens when a group or individual maintains their own culture but loses connect with another culture. And the last one is marginalization. It happens when neither the group's own culture nor communication with the other culture is undertaken, it is the most negative situations. So, example that can we take for this part is when there is a report claims that a strict gender separation is required under Muslim law in Saudi Arabia. Executive women from the United States who do business in the kingdom are expected to dress conservatively and attend meetings in the company of their American male colleagues at all times, but they are not allowed to appear in public with their colleague. In particular, a female American employee of a financial business in Saudi Arabia was arrested for sitting at Starbucks table with a male colleague. Because of this, negotiators need to know your options for change, whether it could be integrations, assimilations, separations, or marginalizations. Basically, to adapt with another culture may be a bit difficult. So, as a negotiator, you need to ask yourself whether you find it valuable to maintain distinct cultural identity or whether you desire to maintain relationships with other cultures. Next one is negotiators need to find out how to show respect in the other culture. Finding out how to be respectful in the other culture is one of the most important preparation steps as a negotiator can make before starting an intercultural negotiations. You should never presume that another culture will stick to the same traditions as one's own. For example, making eye contact with someone can signify respect in Western culture. It is a basic element for socialization and shows a person's interest in your talk. It is believed that a person's eyes indicate their main focus. Therefore, making eye contact with people during conversations may show respect as you are focusing on them. So, the last one is negotiators need to find out how time is perceived in the other culture. Different cultures have quite different idea about how time works. When people from various cultural backgrounds join together for a formal conference, their differing perspective on time become more evident. Therefore, you could notice yourself checking the time and using a calendar to keep track of your appointments if you reside in the USA. Various perspectives on the use of time have formed across cultures. For example, Americans consider being late to be a loss of money, but Brazilians view being on time as less important. There is no right or wrong time use. Each time perspective has its advantages and disadvantages and is inherent to a specific culture. In fact, a psychologist found out that the more economically developed countries like the USA, Germany, or Japan are fast-paced because of their attitude towards time. That is to say that they greatly value time since time is money. So, we need to grasp the differences in time use to be able to function well in the certain situations. In conclusion, success in business requires the ability to negotiate across multiple cultures. Unfortunately, compared to intracultural talks, cross-cultural agreements usually lead to less successful by extensions. Lack of knowledge cultural differences contribute to the issue. Individualism, collectivism, egalitarianism, hierarchy, and direct-indirect communication are all essential dimensions of cultural diversity, according to the threefold model of culture. In addition to recognize various conceptions of power, avoiding attribution error, learning how to respect other cultures, understanding how time is perceived, and analyzing cultural differences to identify differences in values that may expand the pie, negotiators should also assess different options for change, such as integrations, assimilation, separation, and marginalization. So, that is all from us. Thank you.